Now joined by Martin Griffiths. He's the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator at the United Nations. Thank you for joining us this evening, sir. Tell us a little bit to start with about what role the UN is playing when it comes to recovery on the ground following these quakes.
Sure, and thank you very much for having me on. We have been active from the beginning of the response to the earthquake, helping the Turkish authorities and AFAD in particular to do the coordination that we've just seen on the ground of the search and rescue. We've played a small part in supporting that. We are responsible for a network of international search and rescue groups. And what was so amazing, as you know, in the response to the Turkiye earthquakes, was the extraordinary international response on search and rescue. So as you have been saying, that phase is coming to a conclusion. The next phase is one of recovery and humanitarian assistance. We have just produced an appeal for $1 billion for 3 months for humanitarian needs in Turkey, and another one for about 400 million for Syria. So this appeal has been launched internationally, and donations are coming in from member states. And UN agencies and NGOs will be very active on the ground in collaboration with your authorities to try to do what they always do in these kinds of circumstances. And the special horror of this earthquake, of these earthquakes, 3 now, of course, means that getting to people and understanding their trauma is as important as anything else.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit, about those priorities, because that's particularly interesting. You mentioned there the trauma. Our correspondent in Hatay province earlier was talking about the mental health effects that people have experienced after these quakes. So when you're looking at priorities on the ground, dealing with humanity and dealing with suffering, where do you begin to point those priorities?
It's really difficult. You know, we have a category in the humanitarian world which is life-saving. But you know, life-saving can cover a multitude of actions, and indeed our appeal for $1 billion for Turkey is all life-saving. Life-saving includes healthcare, it includes nutrition, it includes food, it includes, hugely important in the case of this crisis, shelter, a huge issue. I want to come back to that if I may. But also then, yes, I think it's really important to understand the mental health issues. And those of us, your correspondents, who've had the terrible privilege of visiting these areas, listening to the almost dead comments of people who have rescued some of their children, but not all of their children. And there's one remark which I heard in Turkey, which stayed with me, which was of a mother talking about the incredible noise of the earthquake at 4:17 a.m. on that Monday, the 6th. So loud, so sudden, that she could not hear the cries of the children in bed next to her. That kind of fright and shock, followed very quickly by the collapse of the building, the escape of some of their family and not all, that's going to take a long time to live through. And so listening to them, providing support, providing safety, providing safe shelter, these are the priorities.
Yeah, you mentioned that you wanted to return to the issue of shelter and why that is such an urgent priority. I assume as the recovery stage moves on to a kind of the next few months and ensuring people have places to live and get on with their lives.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the number of homeless, of course, is huge in both Turkey and Syria. Finding tents on the market, very, very difficult. Most tents have been bought and delivered. Finding places, shelters for people to live. People have been moved into schools, but schools need to open, both in Turkey and Syria. Shelter is so important because it is precisely the key thing that people have lost as a result of the earthquake, along with their belongings, along with some of their family members. And so providing shelter begins to restore some kind of quality of normal life. And providing a plan for shelter in the weeks and months to come is therefore a central obligation. And I know your government, Turkish government, is very active on that, and same in Syria. with great difficulty, because it's difficult to know how to uh, find shelter for these people. And we do know, most importantly, that we ain't yet seen the total number of unsafe buildings, many of which, sorry, will need to be brought down in both these countries, which is going to be a terrible emotional moment for people who've seen their buildings survive, but because they're unsafe, need to be collapsed. We ain't seen the end of this yet.
Certainly not. So much work still left to do, as you point out there. Talk to us a little bit. We'll come on to speaking about Syria very shortly, but I know you sort of visited the region. How does the UN work with governments in times of crisis like this? Do you get to meet the government officials as you're going in? Are you welcomed? How do you get access to the country when this type of disaster happens?
Yes, I was in fact on my way to Ankara, um, planned to go there just after the actual earthquake came, because we have a lot of dealings with Turkish government on the Black Sea operation, for example. And I met your foreign minister and others on the day 3 of the earthquake, and then went to the zones. The United Nations, as in Ankara, has an office staffed by people in the agencies, World Health, UNHCR, World Food Programme, who have, of course, over time developed substantial relations with authorities, both at national and subnational level. In Turkiye, particularly because of the vulnerability to natural disasters, there's a huge, as you've seen, massive capacity in the government. And we have worked very closely with your authorities over many years to learn from that capacity to build it up in other countries. Syria is different, because Syria is a place where we have been working for the last 10 or 11 years in a situation of conflict. We have humanitarian programs. We have people who can look at the effects of conflict. We have big security issues. But what was interesting in Turkey was the immediate um, setting up of a very constructive and detailed relationship with the authorities. I went to see, as I say, the leaders in Ankara, but also in Marash, which you've just been showing the people there. So there are established relations. We in a crisis like this, we accelerate into a different gear.
Yeah, it's fascinating to understand just how it all works. Now, you mentioned the different international teams on the ground. Our reporters have been bringing us stories from Malaysian teams, Azerbaijani teams. You know, incredible seeing different parts of the world all flying into Turkey to lend a hand in the last fortnight or so. What have you made of the way that countries have pulled together in this crisis compared to, say, others you've dealt with?
Well, I think I'm right, and I believe this is the case. This is an unprecedented scale of international response in search and rescue. I mean, the number of teams coming from over 130 countries, I believe, it's never happened this size before, and they come straight away, as you know. Search and rescue teams are primed to arrive within 24 hours of a disaster, and that's incredibly important, of course, in a situation like an earthquake. And as we heard from the Azeris there, they've stayed right through, and with 700 people in their team, it's remarkable. So what we've seen is the expression of solidarity. But, and I stress this, it's also based on forward planning, people train together, they know the job when they get there. This is a very professional operation in search and rescue. As we know, search and rescue barely deployed teams into northwest Syria, and not much in the government-controlled areas of Syria. But Turkey was a scene of great international solidarity, and we must all be grateful for that.
And Turkey has shown much gratitude, I think, for its international support it's received. You mentioned, though, Syria. Let's go on to talking about that, because it's hard to know where to begin. It's tragedy upon tragedy for the people that have experienced that quake. What are your main concerns about that particularly fragile region?
As you say, it's a fragile region. I went to Aleppo after visiting Turkey, and Aleppo, of course, we all know, has had terrible decade of conflict, destroying houses, families, economy, services. And for Aleppo then to have that crisis which they were just emerging from, just about, and then to have the earthquake come on top of that was two crises at once. And the same goes for Idlib and northwest Syria. So what we're seeing in Syria is a compounding of the problems of the conflict with the problems of the earthquakes. And in Syria, it's been extremely difficult over these many years to build back basic services for people because of the war and various other reasons. And so these services were not present to respond to the earthquakes, very different from Turkiye. In northwest Syria, just getting access was very difficult. We're very grateful to the Syrian government for us opening up to more border crossings from Turkey. We now have 3 running. 350 trucks have gone through these crossings since the earthquake. There's one of them, I'm sure. So the response is coming. We were slow in the northwest, and I think I said that publicly.
Martin Griffiths, it's been fantastic speaking to you. Thank you for making time for us from New York.
Thank you so much. Thank you.